Section 4 of the Rover, Volume 1, Number 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Rover, Volume 1, Number 3, edited by Seba Smith and Lawrence Labree. Section 4. The Jewel of the Harem, by Lawrence Labree. Nur Mahal was the most beautiful of all the slaves in the seraglio of the Sultan Ben Youssef. The soft and voluptuous luster of her large black eyes, the delicate tint of her beautiful cheek, and the ravishing sweetness of her pouting lips, parting at times to betray teeth that rivaled the whiteness of new-fallen snow. Real pearls of Omar were so many tokens that the possessor was of Georgian extraction, one of the many victims that in a late successful invasion of her unhappy country by the Sultan and his troops had been added to the harems of the Persian nobles and of their ambitious and tyrannical monarch. Of all the unfortunate captives of the illustrious Sultan, none stood so high in his especial regard as the lovely Nur Mahal, and for her his love and esteem seemed boundless, so much so that it was suspected that a day was not far distant when the fair Georgian would share the throne of the magnificent Khusru Shawan Ben Youssef. With much condescension, kindness, and lenity did he treat his beautiful captive, but to no effect. She remained firm and unswerving. She often repulsed him with much severity, upbraiding him as the oppressor of her country and the merciless jailer of herself and her unfortunate companions. Among the nobles of the court of Ben Youssef was Callimachus, a brave and generous prince of the Seleucidae, a renowned and chivalrous warrior and a zealous supporter of the Sultan, though opposed to many of his harsh and tyrannical measures. To him, then, did the Sultan communicate his ill success with the lovely Nur Mahal. He pictured to him in glowing terms the ardor of his passion for the beautiful captive, of the many and unsuccessful attempts to ingratiate himself in her favour, and of her continued obstinacy. "I have tempted her love," said the Sultan, "with costly and magnificent presents, and by flattery. Still she resists me, and the only reply she makes is, 'Restore me to my friends and my country, and I will bless you, I will pray you.'" And does the Qibla Alam suspect no hitherto untried method of subduing the obstinacy of this bright jewel of the seraglio? Inquired Callimachus. "Alas, my Callimachus, none. I have exhausted all my efforts to please, and my endeavours to win to no purpose. Like the Houris of paradise, she seems rather to be dreamed of than possessed. Favourite of the Prophet, do the honours which you bestow as freely as falls the dew seem of no value in the eyes of the lovely Nur Mahal? Even so, yet deserving as thou art, O king, perseverance in thy desires may at length bring thee that love which thou seekest. Recollect that the illustrious Timur, when once hard pressed by his enemies, took shelter in a ruinous building, where for many a tedious hour he was obliged to sit alone, ere an opportunity was offered him to escape. While thus situated, his attention was arrested by the efforts of an ant to carry a grain of corn up a wall of great height, during which time it fell to the earth 69 times. But at the 70th time it was successful. From this, that great monarch and illustrious warrior received a useful lesson, by which many times in after life he profited much. I acknowledge, my Callimachus, the force of the application, but then Timur warred with men. Had he or the ant had to do with the petulancy of woman, their perseverance would have failed them. However, I have another method in my brain, which I think will prove successful. I will put my cause into thy hands, that you may plead before this proud Georgian, as I would plead for myself. If you succeed according to my fondest hopes, I will requite the obligation by making thee my vizier, and the brightest jewel in my diadem shall glitter in thy turban. Be true, be faithful, and my liberality shall know no bounds. But if thou art false, by the beard of the prophet, my vengeance shall be terrible. God is great, and Mahomet is his prophet. Even as the king of the faithful wishes it, so shall it be done, replied Callimachus. The slave shall be removed to an apartment in the palace, where you can visit her, and I hope soon to hear that you have succeeded according to my wishes. The Sultan quitted the apartment, leaving Callimachus to ponder upon the strange trust confided to his care. The 5th morning after the above incident dawned beautifully and brightly. The beams of the rising sun gilded the lofty turrets and minarets of Shiraz, and cast a gleam of cheerfulness upon the countenances of the numerous throngs of Moslems that crowded its streets, some on their way to the baths, some to the mosques, others to the bazaars, and many for pleasure. The sweet bowers of Masala and the 3 rose gardens of the princes sent to heaven a sweet and grateful fragrance. But among all the brightness and joyousness of the morning, there was one face shrouded in gloom. The pensive tear stood in her upraised eye, her fair cheek rested upon her hand, and her lips were parted as though in silent prayer. It was the beautiful, the unfortunate Nur Mahal. Although removed to a more commodious and magnificent apartment than was first allotted her, with a door that opened upon a garden, still the splendour and garish magnificence which surrounded her illy accorded with the feelings of the poor captive. She thought of her own dear home, of her parents, her sisters, her brothers, and her grief was too deep for utterance. Thoughtfully and silently she mourned, for what did she value life, cut off from all that she held dear, a captive and annoyed daily with a wooer whom she abhorred. Thus sat she in silent misery, when her ears caught the sound of steps approaching her apartment. Her heart trembled within her as she thought of the Sultan and his oppressive importunities. She feared that he would not much longer mildly bear with her abhorrence of him. She saw no gleam of hope, she felt none. She dreaded the hour when his patience must tire and his temper fail. The door was opened, and a mild and kind voice addressed her as the most beautiful. It thrilled through her every nerve. She dared not look up, but she could not be mistaken. It must be. It was the voice of the noble Callimachus. As he advanced toward her, she arose to receive him. His admiring gaze rested upon the fair being before him, and he thought that never, in his brightest and happiest dreams of fancy, had he seen aught so lovely. For a while he seemed so wrapped in wonder that he forgot by whose request and for what purpose he was sent. Most lovely, though most unfortunate, began Callimachus, the most illustrious of the faithful, the Sultan Ben Yusuf commissioned me, his devoted slave, to wait upon the royal beauty of the Seraglio, to lay before her his distressed condition, and to beg the humanity of thy gracious favour to soothe the wound of his much discomfited heart." "Return then to him thou callest thy master," said Nur Mahal, "and tell him that as I am deprived of my liberty, my parents, my country, and my friends, life to me is as valueless as my freedom is unexpected. There is only one way to win my esteem, none to win my love. I defy him. He may torture me, he can invent no torture greater than my confinement. Death to me were indeed liberty, come in what shape it may. Tell him this, and likewise that it is my wish he persecute me no longer. I will hold out no hope to him, there is none, and it were a waste of breath, of time, of words, to pursue this useless fallacy. Alas, sweet flower of Georgia, hast thou considered well the firmness of thy purpose to return such an answer to the Sultan?" "So well," replied Nur Mahal, "that I had determined to tell it to his face, had he presented himself instead of thee. Unfortunate Nur Mahal, pained as I am to afflict thy maiden heart, the wishes and behests of my sovereign must be reverenced. Yet I could wish thee a better and a happier lot, as the circumstances which surround thee cannot be avoided. I would advise thee to reconsider the wishes of his heart, and if thou canst incline toward his will. It is in vain, and your advice falls unheeded. Either leave me, or cease to persecute me with the Sultan's importunities." Admiration of the spirited girl for a moment held Callimachus mute, and a strange and heretofore unknown feeling trembled in his breast. At first he scarce knew what report to make to the Sultan, but he finally resolved that when he returned he would flatter him with hopes of his ultimate success, thereby securing the opportunity of often seeing her. He therefore kindly took his leave of her, expressing a hope that he might see her again, and recommending her to think carefully upon what he had said to her. The Sultan, eager to learn the success of Callimachus, impatiently awaited his return in his private apartment. As he entered, Ben Yusef rose to meet him. "Now, my Callimachus, how speeds the wooing? What success? How seems she? Would she listen to you? By the beard of the Prophet, had you but seen her yesterday, I thought she would smite me." "Your Serene Majesty will be pleased to hear that she is more inclined to reason to-day, yet she is possessed of great stubbornness, which will require several days to overcome. But I will venture to say you may give some small encouragement to your hopes." "'Tis very well," and Callimachus began to hope for the viziership. "Go on as thou hast begun, and if thou art successful there shall be no bounds to my liberality. Thy slave is ever ready at thy bidding. Thou mayest command." "'Tis good. Thou mayest now retire, but recollect tomorrow, my Callimachus." Callimachus, bowing to the command of his sovereign, turned to depart, and had reached the door when the stern voice of the Sultan recalled him. "Look you, Callimachus, see that you do not play me false, or by Allah," and he furiously stamped his foot upon the marble floor. "Am I ignorant of the consequences, or dost thou think me a fool?" replied Callimachus. "Thou art right. Callimachus is not a fool. Farewell." The aspiring and ambitious noble departed. His mind was filled with contesting emotions. He had dared to look upon the Queen of the Seraglio, his Sultan's favourite, with the eyes of love. He had allowed himself to drink deep of the intoxicating passion, to feast his heart on the beauties of her person and the nobleness of her mind. Alas, he had already wandered far from the path of duty to his sovereign. He felt that he was getting into a labyrinth of difficulties, from which it would be hard to extricate himself. Yet, like a charmed bird, he gradually closed upon the danger which he could scarcely expect would end otherwise than fatal to himself. The next day, and the next, and the next, found Callimachus a visitor of the lovely Nur Mahal. He had forgotten, or seemed to, the interests of the Sultan, and for himself alone, did he now plead, not at first with the outpourings of his passion, for that would have shocked the captive's ear, but with the silent pleading of his eyes, the kind and sympathizing manner of his conversation, endeavouring to lead her mind from the reflection of her unfortunate captivity, conversing with her of her own dear country, till, by degrees imperceptible to herself, he won her friendship and esteem, and at last she began to wait with impatience for his daily visits. In the meantime did he report himself to his sovereign, as rapidly progressing in his suit, and hoping shortly to remove all difficulties. For a week did he visit Nur Mahal in this manner, and the Sultan began to grow impatient. Callimachus had not yet spoken of love, but now that things were drawing to a climax, now that the secret could not be hidden much longer, he was determined to have a short time of pure ecstasy, a few moments of unalloyed and fearless bliss in breathing into the ear of the innocent and beautiful Nur Mahal the adoration of his fond heart, the declaration of his devoted love. There could not be, there seemed no hope of escaping detection, but his heart was firm, and his purpose was determined. He would make one effort for himself and for her, and if that failed him, alas, alas! On the morning of the 7th day from receiving his commission, he entered the apartment of Nur Mahal, resolved on declaring his passion. The Sultan had on the previous day shown evident signs of suspicion and displeasure at the length of time already taken by Callimachus, the more so as he reflected on the beauty of his captive. Naturally of a petulant and suspecting disposition, his anxiety and impatience seemed to increase upon this occasion to more than their ordinary strength, and with hasty and irregular steps did he pace the marble floors of his palace. In the meantime was Callimachus breathing his idolatry to the object of his heart's adoration. Kneeling before her, as she reclined upon a couch of imperial purple, did he whisper to her the fond hopes of his soul. As his heart pictured, so did his tongue utter, and as he knelt he forgot that he was surrounded by danger, nor seemed he less happy than in his brightest and most enthusiastic visions. Although Nur Mahal had been led to suspect by the manner in which he had of late addressed her what were the sentiments of his heart, yet it surprised her when she heard him reveal in direct words the love he bore her, nor was she less pleased. His daily appearance and kind attentions were objects to her which won her gratitude and friendship, and each day she more and more watched for the hour of his visit, and found greater pleasure in his society. With moistened eyes and a beating heart did she listen to the fond adulation of Callimachus, and when he had spoken to her all that his tongue could utter, or his heart prompt, she threw herself weeping on his neck. And as she lay within his arms, heart to heart and cheek to cheek, did the innocent girl vow to him the reciprocation of her first pure and virgin love. What a paradise to them were those first few brief moments of bliss! If the heaven of the Moslem contains aught like to it, surely there is some excuse for their wrong, though sincere worship. And now they had declared their love that in their present condition they could not enjoy. The time was fast approaching when the Sultan would learn that he had profited nothing by the visits of Callimachus, when he would consider him as of no further use as a mediator, and remove from him any opportunity of again visiting Nur Mahal. Upon this and its consequences had Callimachus reflected. He had not rushed into danger without planning some mode of escape. They both knew that to live apart would be misery to each, and that to enjoy it at all there must be a material change from the present, and he was about unfolding a scheme by which they might escape, when the door suddenly opened, and the Sultan strode into the middle of the room. Nur Mahal sprang from the arms of her lover, and hiding her face in her hands, tremblingly awaited the sound of the Sultan's voice. while Callimachus, with folded arms and a stern and lofty look, met his fierce and malignant glance, unquailed, and as he knew his doom was fixed in the Sultan's mind, he was determined to await his fate with that coolness and courageous firmness which had so conspicuously shone in the many battles he had fought for his sovereign. With ineffable scorn, hatred, and contempt did the Sultan regard the objects of his displeasure for a few moments. Then, calling a guard which was always within hearing, he said, "Take this traitor, this recreant, love-sick lord, to prison, and at noon tomorrow bring me his head, and let his dog of a carcass be taken to the plains without the city, fit only for what it will become, food for the ravenous hyenas and jackals. Away, and see that it is performed, or by the sword of the holy prophet, there is not a head among ye all that shall not share his fate." Instantly did the satraps of the Sultan surround the unfortunate Callimachus to conduct him to his prison, and as they crossed the threshold of the apartment, a loud shriek was uttered by Nur Mahal, and she fell senseless at her captor's feet. Alone and in his dungeon, Callimachus had leisure to reflect upon his fate. He knew that a limit had been set to his life, and he made up his mind to meet, with a philosophical resignation, what he knew to be inevitable. While thus reflecting upon his situation, he began to think upon the possibility of an escape. He was acquainted with every cell in the prison, and there was a glimmer. One slight ray of hope lighted up the dreariness of his condition. There was one cell from which he might escape, only one, and the hope that now remained to him was that he might be in it. Adjoining one of the cells was another, similar in construction, separated by a thick, strong wall of stone, in which was a small grated window with upright bars, to all appearance firmly set in the massive wall. In one of these had Callimachus been placed, which he ascertained by groping around in the dark. The other apartment was used for the storage of implements of torture, irons for the hands and feet of prisoners, chains, and numerous articles which had been laid aside for want of repair. As Callimachus ascertained his situation in the prison, his heart grew lighter, but there were many difficulties yet to overcome. In the first place, he had to wait for the approach of night, which he did with as much patience as he could acquire. To him it seemed the longest day he had ever passed, but it did at last roll away, and as night gathered her sable curtain around the city, an hour after hour passed away till Callimachus thought it must be midnight. He began to prepare himself for the task that was to him either life or death. He approached the grated window, and with a throbbing heart did he grasp its rusted bars. He applies his strength, his hopes increase, they yield, and give him entrance to the next apartment. Then cautiously did he grope his way to the foot of a flight of steps which led to the floor above his prison. His foot was upon the first step, the second, the third. He mounted to the top. He listened. Not a sound fell upon his ear. He put his hand upon the door, and for a moment he hesitated, for upon the chance of its being unfastened depended all his hopes of escaping. He hardly dared venture to try it, for he trembled between hope and fear, and one moment would either increase his hopes or sink him in the lowest despondency. With a sudden effort he brought his mind to a point of determination. He recollected that it was frequently unlocked, for the jailer was ignorant of any secret communication between that cell and those occupied for the detention of prisoners. There was but one besides himself who knew the secret, and that one was in Ispahan. He tried the door. It opened, and the fresh air played on his face. He stepped softly into the entrance hall of the prison. The door that opened upon the street was ajar, as though some person had but for a moment gone out. To avail himself of this opportunity was but the thought of an instant, and rushing into the street he sped onward as fast as his feet would carry him, nor did he stop till without the city, and free from the tyrant's grasp. The first thought of Callimachus when he found himself safe was to revenge himself upon the Sultan, and secure his beloved Nur Mahal from a worse fate than had awaited himself. He pursued his way into Khorasan, enlisted the nobles on his side, and in a short time was enabled to raise an army sufficient to make Ben Yusef tremble. It was a time when rival chieftains fought in their sovereign's name their own battles, and the country on one side was ravaged with the Uzbeks, and on the other by the Ottomans. With a powerful army, raised by the friendship of the reigning prince or governor of Khorasan, he marched into the province of Fars. The success of his arms was complete. He had beaten the Sultan's troops in every instance, and at last encamped at night, within a day's march of Shiraz, in an open plain, and in view of which reposed the main army of the Sultan, commanded by himself, after a weary day's march, upon an eminence within a mile of them. The decisive battle was yet to be fought, and no sooner had the light of the following morn began to appear than both armies were busy in preparing for the ensuing contest. At last the signal for the onset was given, and the opposing forces met. The Sultan himself led on the van of his army, and presented a fair opportunity for the marksmen of the invaders, but every javelin fell harmless, every weapon turned from him, and he fought with the ferocity of a tiger. The victory seemed doubtful, many fell on both sides, and the slaughter was becoming immense, when the attention of the armies was directed to a place where the two leaders were engaged in severe combat face to face, the Sultan and Callimachus. For a while it seemed doubtful which would be the victor, but the youth and coolness of Callimachus prevailed, and one blow of his keen scimitar clove the tyrant's skull, and in a short time after the whole army capitulated, and the conquering Callimachus entered Shiraz as its lord and master, who but a short time before made his escape from it a fugitive. His first act was to seek Nur Mahal and claim her, without the fear of a rival, for his blushing bride. He found her in the room where he had last seen her, still a captive, but pure and unstained. She shrieked for joy when she saw him enter, and fell swooning into his arms. The rest is soon told. They were shortly after united, and lived long and happily together, beloved by the people whom they governed, and respected by their friends. End of Section 4.